Hello everyone, welcome to another video, another planty video. It is me, Desiree, and today I'm doing something a little different. I don't have any plants to show you in this video, but I was inspired to do this because I watched someone's video not too long ago and it was like stuff you need as a beginner, and as I was watching it, I was getting slightly irritated because I was like, no, you don't need that, you don't need that, you don't need that. I didn't buy that, I still don't own that. And it's been 2 years now that I've been into plants and learning about them, and there are still things I don't own and things I don't feel like I need to go out and get, you know what I mean? So I thought I would share some things you don't need as a beginner, because plants are expensive enough as it is, especially if you're just getting into them. Suddenly your eyes are going to be open for the first time. Like, as many times as I went to the grocery store, I never saw the plants, and now it's the first thing I look at when I go. So you know, you're gonna want to keep buying plants. You don't need to also buy a whole bunch of stuff. I really think that you should only buy stuff if you have a need for it or if you just want it. I mean, and of course you could buy whatever you want. You don't have to listen to me. But what my idea was when I first started out was to buy stuff as I felt a need for it. So there are still some things I don't own that are on this list that I'm just gonna share with you. So of course, everyone's different. If you want to buy everything, you want to start out and immediately drop a bunch of money on a bunch of accessories and cool stuff for your plants, go for it. Do whatever you want. It's your life. But if you're starting out, I'm here to tell you, you don't need most stuff that people would tell you that you need. So the first thing I wrote down was a humidity monitor and a light monitor. You don't need those things. At least I didn't need those. I have no need for those. I live in a very dry climate here in the Southwest, and most of the time our humidity is very low. Like, I'm gonna pull it up right now and see what it is. Yesterday I think it was like 12. Oh look, humidity 10%. So we're very, very dry here, and I still don't feel the need to have a humidifier running all the time, let alone know what my humidity is in the house, like with the monitor. I don't even know what I would do with that information. Like, I would see the percentage and then go, what do I do? Like, does my plant tell me what percent of humidity it needs? Like, I just don't get the need for it. It doesn't do anything for me. I guess the only reason someone would need that was maybe if you are growing and selling plants. But again, this is a list for beginners, and as a beginner, you don't need one and you probably never will. Same with a light monitor. I have no idea. So it's really hard to describe what light is, like what low light, what bright light, indirect light, direct light. I mean, some of them are very self-explanatory and you kind of learn as you go what bright indirect light is, what bright light is. And as many times as someone has described it in a video, they all describe it differently. But as far as getting a light monitor, that information isn't going to do anything for me. Like, if I see, like, what is it going to tell me? I don't know, it's just going to be some information that I'm going to find useless. So those are two things that I don't think you really ever need, especially as a beginner. I don't have them and I have no reason to ever buy them. The second thing were lots of soil. I wrote mediums, but just like soil stuff. So I am a huge fan of using the soil straight out of the bag. I do mix two things together. So my go-to soil is Miracle-Gro Indoor Potting Mix mixed with the Miracle-Gro Orchid Mix. And the Orchid Mix is pretty much just different sizes of bark. And the only reason I mix those together is because I have had a lot of experience with the Miracle-Gro Indoor Potting Mix, and over time, after about a year, maybe 10 months to a year, it really gets kind of hard as a rock and kind of hydrophobic. Like, you have to soak it for a long time to get it to absorb water. And I just find that if I mix it with the bark, it keeps it a little bit lighter and fluffier, and it doesn't get as compacted very quickly. So that's my go-to mix. I have purchased other bags. Like, I've bought the indoor mix, the earthworm castings, I bought the perlite, I bought little what are they, fertilizer shaker things to put in there, and I made my own, and it felt really fun to put it in a big bowl and mix it up. But ultimately I found it to be not all that different. I didn't find that the plants I put in that soil to be doing any better than the ones that were in other soil. So I don't think you need to go out and buy a whole bunch of soil amendments right away. Like, I've seen people make their own mix and they put in earthworm castings, soil, the bark, activated charcoal, peat, or cocoa core, all kinds of random stuff. And I mean, especially if you're in a small environment, you don't need to store 7 to 8 separate bags of stuff. You can just buy one bag, maybe the second bag. Like I would highly suggest getting the mix, the bark mix, and mixing it in there just to get it a little bit lighter, fluffier. Especially if you're just starting out, you don't need to buy a whole bunch of soils because you're just barely learning how to take care of the plant and learning where to put it in your house and learn what kind of lighting it needs. You also don't need to worry and obsess about over a bunch of soils. And I have found that it's never really mattered. The plants are doing fine. Doesn't matter if I spent a lot of money on a bunch of different soil mixes from fancy brands. This year I do want to try a different brand of soil and kind of try something different than Miracle-Gro just to kind of see what's out there. But you just have to buy one. You don't even have to mix it if you don't want. I use the regular indoor potting mix straight from the bag for over a year and it was fine. But over time it does kind of lose its luster a little bit. But as just starting out, don't obsess over the soil. You don't need to be like particular with every single plant's soil. I would say if it's a cactus or something, get a cactus soil, but everything else, you kind of just figure it out as you go. You don't feel overwhelmed trying to buy special soil for every single plant that you have. The next one I put that you don't need as a beginner is a humidifier. So like I said, I live in the Southwest. The humidity today is 10% and my plants are just fine. There are some plants, of course, a lot of plants are going to thrive more in higher humidity, but in my experience, it's not that many. Like most plants are going to be just fine living in your house. As long as you're watering them adequately and giving them the right amount of light, they're going to be fine. I would rather have a couple of crispy tips on my plants than have a humidifier running 24 hours a day. So I used to actually have a humidifier running in this room and the plants were doing great, but I just felt funny having the humidifier in here with like the walls being wet. Like there's no fan in here, there's no airflow. I have a lot of makeup and other stuff in here that I don't want to be moist all the time. So I just decided not to run it anymore. I moved it into the other room and every now and then I turn it on in there just for fun. But you don't need one if you're just starting out. Your plants are gonna do just fine. You don't need to buy a humidifier, especially a really fancy one that someone is selling to you with that discount code and all that kind of stuff. It looks great when they're doing a plant tour and they have like this really nice humidifier with this really nice little mist going around. But ultimately, you don't need one. You don't need one. And if you don't have one, let me know. Let me know if you do or don't have a humidifier and how you feel about them, because I would love to know. But I am all team no humidifier. You don't need it. It's fine. If I can make my plants work in the driest climate, you're gonna be just fine. I did ask my boyfriend like what things he thinks should go on this list, and he said fancy or expensive plants right out of the gate. So I would say yes, that is correct. Like when you're first starting out, buy the plants you're finding at the hardware store, at Lowe's and at Home Depot, at Walmart, the grocery store, wherever you're usually shopping. Most likely they have a little houseplant section, especially like grocery stores and stuff. I'm a huge fan of buying plants at the grocery stores. They have some really great varieties, and try different stores too. If you always go to the same grocery store all the time, try a different one, try a different chain of grocery store, because you'll find some amazing plants. I find a ton of really great ones. I just did a big old haul recently of a bunch of great $6.99 plants that I found there. So you don't need really fancy plants, and to be honest, like when you're first starting out, at least how I was, every plant was fancy because it was new to me. It was new and it was really cool and exciting. So I felt like, look at this really special, amazing plant. It doesn't have to cost a lot, although the cost is very relative. Like you might think a $20 plant is really expensive and another person might think that's a great deal. So it kind of depends, but just know that the plants you have are really special and beautiful. You don't need to spend a ton of money on them. You could just buy your plants at the grocery store and they're gonna be just as nice as the ones you would buy online. You know, and as you get really used to them and you're like, ooh, I would really love to try something that's a little more expensive or from a specialty shop, then maybe give it a try. But I would say, you know, don't spend all your money on plants right away, especially if you're just starting out. Like when I was just starting out, I was buying. I mean, I guess I still am, but because I was seeing them all for the first time, so all of them were new to me. All of them were really cool and fancy and different. So if you're gonna just start out and you feel like you're feeling that something inside where you're just wanting to buy all the time, buy the cheap ones, buy the cheap plants, go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, buy the $5, $6 little plants and spend your little heart out on those. rather than spending a ton of money on one really fancy plant and you're like, I don't even know how to take care of this. So buy a lot of cheap plants at first when you're starting out. I mean, I buy cheap plants all the time, but you don't need to start out with the fancy ones you're seeing on Instagram and that you're seeing on YouTube. Everyone has different tastes in plants and yours might change and grow over time, but start out with the cheap stuff. It's still just as beautiful and nice and fancy and special. The next thing I wrote down that you don't need as a beginner are special little snips. You don't need to buy a special pair of scissors for your plants. You could literally just use your kitchen scissors, whatever scissors you have, as long as they're sharp and they're clean, they're gonna work just fine. I did end up buying a little, like that little orange pair that everybody has from Fiskars. I got it Walmart, I guess, I don't know, something like that. But anyway, bought the little scissors because I just wanted a special pair that I could have and keep in a drawer for the plants, because I felt like I had to constantly be cleaning the other ones. But as long as they're clean and sharp, you could use whatever you already have. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of buying something when I feel like I might need it, and I didn't buy those scissors for a very long time. I was just using whatever, and the only reason I really use them is to cut off dead foliage. Like, I rarely go out of my way to propagate my plants. It's not really my thing, so I don't have a special pair of scissors for that. I really just keep it for cutting off dead leaves and kind of pruning my plants and keeping them looking nice. And then on the same vein, propagation vessels. You don't need to go thrifting and buying a bunch of glassware to propagate your plants, because most likely when you're first starting out, you're not cutting up your plants right away. At least when I was starting out, like even now, I can't hardly bring myself to cut a plant to propagate it because it's perfect the way that it is. Like, it's hard enough to cut off a dead leaf. It's way harder to cut the plant to make a new one. And it's gonna be like a tiny little plant. Anyway, especially if you're starting out, you're probably not cutting up your plants right away. You're like loving the way that they look and you just want it to be perfect. So you don't need to buy a bunch of propagation vessels. And if you end up needing one or wanting to do that, use what you already have. Use up glass that you saved, glasses you don't use, little plastic cups, use your old spaghetti jar, salsa jar, like save some of those and use those for your propagations. You don't need to go buying special vessels, because a lot of the time they're shaped like this, and when you put your plant in there, it's gonna grow roots and fill that out, and it's gonna be kind of hard to get it out. So just use what you have until you feel like, you know what, I wanna get some nicer vessels for this, or you wanna grow plants in water. But for now, just use what you have. You don't need to buy a bunch of fancy ones. But if you end up wanting to, go thrifting. Go get the cheap ones at the Goodwill. I mean, kinda. Goodwill's kind of expensive now. What am I saying? The next one is lots of space. I think this is one my boyfriend said. So when you're first starting out, you're gonna be wanting to just buy, like I was, especially running out of space in your apartment, but you don't need a plant room. You don't need a special like whole dedicated area for your plants. I'm a big fan, I mean, I try to make the plants look like they're part of the decor and not like we're in a plant production house. Yeah, there is just a table there with a bunch of plants on it, but I try to make them not just all over the floor, like they're on shelves and stuff. So you don't need a plant room. So if you're watching YouTube or you're on Instagram watching plant people, you don't need to have a special room dedicated for your plants. I think a lot of people just happen to have an extra room in their house and they make that the plant room, like their hobby room. So if they weren't into plants, it'd be for some other hobby. Oh, this is where I do my crafting or my workouts or whatever. So it's more like a hobby room rather than a plant room. But don't think that you have to have one of those. You could just have your plants in your living room on maybe like a bookshelf, have them all there, maybe a couple of tables in your front room or your den or wherever you have them. Just work with the space that you have. You don't feel like you need to have a plant dedicated room or a room just for your hobbies, you know. Work with what you have. You don't need a plant room. And the last one I put that I think is also the most important is you don't need to lose your mind. You don't need to lose your mind. So when I was first starting out, I was so overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with the names of the plants because they're words I had never heard before. I never heard the word propagation before or variegation before. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what they even entailed. I just learned from just reading and watching and just learning. You kind of just pick up on what the words mean. So I didn't know what those words mean. I didn't know what bottom watering meant, what top watering. I didn't know how to fertilize. I still don't. I was learning the names of the plants, the botanical names and the nicknames. Like, It was so overwhelming. So not only learning all these new words, but you have to find a new soil. Everything needs its own special soil. Everything needs its own lighting. Everything has a different fertilizer requirement. Like, it was just super overwhelming, but you don't need to make it that way. For the most part, all of the plants are pretty much gonna be very similar in care. You're gonna water them when they're dry and you're gonna give them some nice light. That's kind of it. You don't need to lose your mind, like, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot your plant. So I keep looking at this plant over there because it has a little brown tip on it. And I remember back then I would look it up online. Okay, I gotta see, what does a brown tip on my leaf mean? And every single resource that pops up when you look that up online is gonna say you have a fungus, cut off the leaf right away, throw the plant away, it's pretty much dead anyway. It has either too much light, not enough light, too much fertilizer, not enough fertilizer, too much water, not enough water. So everyone online is just taking care of their own plants, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot it. Don't go crazy trying to try all of those things out. Usually things work out on their own. Yes, you are gonna lose some plants and they're gonna die, they're gonna crisp up. Just kind of learn from them. And this is why I was saying, don't buy a ton of like super expensive plants right off the bat, because you're going to kill plants. It's just the way that it is. A plant is gonna get crispy, it's gonna get a weird spot, you're gonna forget to water it. Maybe you didn't know what it meant or what it needed. You put it outside in the direct sun like I did, because that's what I thought plants wanted. And you're gonna kill plants. So don't start out with expensive ones, but also don't lose your mind. If you do kill one, oh well, you probably have plenty of other ones and you could just go buy another one if you want. So don't lose your mind trying to keep up with everyone online and trying to buy everything they're buying, have a plant room, have a perfectly curated like plant collection. Just buy the plants you want and don't try to keep up with everybody, you know. Don't lose your mind is what I'm saying. Don't do it. But that is it. I'm sure there are other things that you don't need as a beginner. One thing I thought of again was fancy pottery. Just buy your cheapy terracotta pots from Lowe's and work with those. Keep them in the plastic pots they come with from the store. Like, work with what you have for now. Like, this is another one of the things I was saying. Buy what you need when you have the need, or buy whatever you want, live your life. But that is it. Those are the things I think you don't need as a beginner. There's a lot of stuff you don't need as a beginner, but that was like the list I kept thinking of and wanted to talk about. So that is it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you bought as a beginner and that you regret buying. Stuff you bought that you actually didn't end up needing, and what advice you would give to beginners on what they actually need and what they really can go without. I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And I will see you later in another video. Goodbye.